Hello everyone, welcome to another video where I want to discuss the search individual flow action. Now this is something that was already available since I believe last year, but it was in beta, and now as part of Summer 24 this has become generally available. I haven't really seen a lot of use cases for this online. I haven't seen a lot of people sharing actual realistic use cases where they use this action within a flow. And so when I found myself needing to use it as part of my project, I wanted to make a quick video just to give you some insight on what that looks like. I have some official Salesforce documentations on this, which I will link as always in the description of this video. So if you're interested in that, please make sure you check that out for more information. But with that out of the way, I kind of want to jump straight into the Salesforce business use case and then show you what that flow looks like. So let's get started. So here we are in a Salesforce environment, and I am just looking at a case record. Now, before I go into more detail into what this case record is all about, I want to go over the account structure for this particular use case. So here we have a person account, and I've labeled this a guest account. So guests in this scenario will be using person accounts in Salesforce, and we can see that we have an email address called owner@emailfake.com. Obviously, all of this is dummy data. And then what we also have is we have a contact record. So this is separate to that person account record. We have a contact record. This is part of a business account, but this contact record has the same email address. So this contact record is called owner contact, and it's part of an account called sample owner account, which has nothing to do with that person account I just showed you, but it does have the same email address. The reason behind this is because on one hand, we're going to have guests using person accounts, and then on the other hand, we're going to have owners using business accounts and therefore using contact records. And the scenario that I wanted to cover is, what if you have an owner who is also a guest? It's possible that they might use the same email address. So when we're thinking about email to case, where they send an email and that creates a case in Salesforce for us, we need to think about how will Salesforce know which contact to match the case to. Is it going to be the person account, the guest account, or is it going to be the contact record or the owner record in that scenario? And so, as you might already know, when you're using email to case, if there are more than one record with the same email address, Salesforce will not link it to any record because it doesn't know which is the right record to link it to. So instead of guessing, Salesforce will just not do anything. And so when we look at this case record, this is an example that we can use whereby we can pretend this case was created through email to case, and it came from the email address I just showed you. And because of that, because we have a person account and a contact record with the same email address, Salesforce has not linked this to any contact. We can see that here on the contact details, there is just no contacts linked to this case just yet. And so what we've created is a screen flow that we put under this tab called contact matching. And when you click on the screen flow, it's going to tell you that there are more than one record with the same email address. And so the end user has to manually link that to the case. So this is the use case that we're using. And so the end user would come here, and in this data table, they will be able to see that we have two results: the guest account, which is the person account, and then the sample owner contact, which is that contact that belongs to that business account I just explained. And we can see that they share exactly the same email address. The type is different. One is a guest, one is an owner. And then you're able to see here that there is a mobile number and then mailing address, but this doesn't really matter. And so now what the end user would do is essentially select the right one. Now, the user would know which is the right one, whether it's an owner or a guest, based on the email that came through. So let's not worry too much about that. but the user will be able to select the right record here. So let's say we'll select the guest as the right contact here, and then we hit finish. And so what this will do is just link that contact to the case. So if we go back to contact details, we can now see that this case is now related to that guest account. Now, if we go back to contact matching, if for whatever reason, if the end user made a mistake and this isn't actually the right contact and they need to relate it to the other contact, they can just come back here. They'll always be able to see this data table here. So they can select the other one and then create that relationship. So again, if we go back to contact details, this is now related to the owner contact. If the case has an email address that doesn't belong to any contact, then the flow is going to display a custom message for that. And so that's covered for. And similarly, if there is only one record from the email that the case came from, then the flow is going to tell you, hey, there's only one record. There's not much you can do here. And so that's pretty much how the logic works on the front end. Let's jump onto the back end and let's have a look at this flow and how we're using this search individual action to achieve this. Just before we jump into the flow itself, I want to point out that this flow was built from a template. And so if you didn't know this, if you go to flow under setup and then click new flow, you're usually prompted with a decision to make whether you want to start from scratch or use a template. Now, if you click use a template, and then in the search bar here, when it loads, if you search for contact, you see that you have an option here that says find contact associated with case from email. Now, if you click there, this flow with a pre-built template is going to open up for you. And this is what it looks like. It's much closer to its final version. It's got fault paths, which my flow should have as well. Thankfully, mine is still a draft, so it's not a finished product, I promise. But you can see that the idea is pretty similar. And that's because the flow that I'm about to show you is a slight variation of this template. You see here that we have find matching contacts, the get record, the variables where we set that count. And so in a minute, I'm going to take you through my version of the flow that we have slightly changed to better fit our use case. But this is where it came from. So two things on this. First, don't give me credit for creating the flow from scratch because it does come from a template. And second, if you're looking to have a similar solution, then start with the template and see if that helps you first. Okay, now let's jump onto my version of the flow and I'll take you through that in a lot more detail. So here is our screen flow. I'm going to take you through this one element at a time. The first thing that we're doing is we're getting that case record. We created a variable called record ID so we can pass that ID into our flow. We set that through the Lightning record page. Very standard practice here. And then what we're doing is we're checking that case record for an email address. So we just want to know whether the case record actually has an email address. And the reason for that is because if there isn't an email address, we want to display a custom message. So if no email address is found, then we just have a screen with a display text that says, hey, there's no email address here. We can't look for contacts without an email address. So that's why we have this decision. But ultimately what we want to do is we want to get a case that has an email address and it just hasn't been linked to a contact yet. And so if it has found an email address, then we're using an assignment element. And what we're doing is we're taking the email address from that case and we're adding it to a variable. We've called this variable search term, and we're going to be using this variable in the next element of our flow. So the next element is the action. It's the search for an individual action. And so the way this works is you need to give it a label. It creates an API name, just like everything else. And then what you're able to do is select your search object. Now, because we're searching for contacts, then we'll select contact as our object. And then you're able to select the search fields within that object. So we have some options here. We want to use it for the email address. And then the value for that, or in other words, the search term, is going to be the value within our variable that we set in the previous element. And that's pretty much all we do here. It's a very easy to use action. We're essentially saying, look, I want you to search this object, this field for this value, and then show me everything that you find. And so in the next element of our flow, we're using a get elements, and we're getting the contacts that the action found. So here for object, again, we're selecting contact. And then for filter contact records, we're using the ID, so the ID of the contact, and we're checking to see whether that's in the value output from our action. Notice how the operator in this get records is in. It's not equals, it's in. So the ID of the context that we're fetching needs to be in the output of our action. Then, now that we've found all of the contacts that match this criteria, we're just setting a count. So we're using an assignment to just get a count of how many records we actually found. So this is really easy to do. We have a variable here. If I show you that, so this is our matching records count. This is what the variable looks like. It's data type number with 0 decimal places. And what we're saying is we're taking all of the records that we fetched through our get records, the element just prior to this one, and we're adding it to this variable, but we're counting it. We want to count them, and then whatever that number is the number that we're putting inside our variable. Now, after that, quite simply, we have a decision to check for that number. We want to know how many we actually found. We're saying, look, if we found more than one contact record, then I want you to do these things. If we only found one contact record, then I want you to do these other things. And if we have found no contact records, then I want you to do this third and default thing. So if we found more than one contact record, then this is when we're presented with that data table. So this is just a screen component. We have some display text here, and then we have a data table that's essentially showing us the results from that get matching contacts, from that get element just after our action. And it's just going to display all of those records here for us. After the user selects one of those records, we're just updating the case. We're getting the case record that we've been using, and then we're updating the contact ID field of that case with whatever value the user selected from our data table. And that's pretty much it. We have a refresh screen action here. This is just going to force refresh the case so that you can see the contact. This is not mandatory. You can obviously manually refresh the record if you want. Now, if the flow has only found one contact record, then what we want to do in this scenario is just display a message. Because if you remember, our use case is to use this when more than one contact record, and that way we can allow our agents to manually link the case to the right one. So if there is only one contact record, it means that Salesforce would have linked that contact to our case for us, which means that there is nothing to do in this flow. And so we just have a screen that kind of tells the end user that that is what's happening. If we haven't found any contact records, it's a similar approach, except in this case, we need to manually create a contact. And so again, we have a screen that just tells the user, tells our agent, hey, there are no contacts in the system with this email address. You should create a new contact, link that to the case, and then resolve the case. So this is a pretty straightforward flow, but it does use this really unique search individual action that is now generally available. If you have any other interesting use cases where you use this action, please feel free to drop that in the comments below. I'd love to hear more about your particular use case. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. Until next time.